As you can probably guess, this one was a bit last minute because figured why not talk about these after the kind of apparently unexpected and unfortunate death of Burt Reynolds, who despite his legendary status and his behemoth career, I think I've only talked about him on here maybe a few times. I know I did a video on Boogie Nights, one on Deliverance, and I think The Last Movie Star when it came out. And I think that might be about it. So I figured why not. I feel like I wouldn't call this necessarily like a tribute video or anything, given my opinion of Cannonball Run, but I do think these are easily the kind of the go-to movies for a lot of people. His career was so vast. It really is one of those cases of it depends on who you're talking to in regards to which movies you directly go to, but usually, whenever I would hear his name growing up, these were the two movies that came to mind, so I figured that's where we would do this. So we'll go ahead and start with Smokey and the Bandit. Obviously, this is the one with all three of them, but for everybody's sake, we're just going to talk about the first one. So, one thing to really notice when you look at this is, once again, like I was saying, about the whole it really depends on who you're talking to as far as what like kind of the most iconic part of his career is, but I think it's almost pretty unanimous because when we get that scene, one of the very first scenes in the movie, when they walk up to him and he's like in the hammock and he's got the hat over his eyes and then he raises it and then laughs at them, was like the introduction of Burt Reynolds as like the way most people see him, because obviously he had like a whole bunch of TV work. He had Navajo Joe in the 60s, Deliverance was 72, stuff like White Lightning and The Longest Yard and Hustle and stuff like that. All of that was before this, but it just sort of feels like when we see that moment with him in the hammock was like this is when the particular portrayal of him was born, more or less. The one that most people think of immediately when they hear that name. It just becomes synonymous with the sound of his name. And so, going right on that, we pretty much have a non-stop movie once he's given his assignment by these guys. It is worth noting that it is, like, obviously you can look at it and see, like, maybe there's, racism or homophobia or whatever, just in tiny little lines here and there that may even just completely go past you without noticing them, but interestingly enough, the most dated thing about the movie seems to be its plot. With the whole, like, cores couldn't be in a certain area, so it was technically bootlegging if they took it from this place to this place, in Georgia. So, like, if you don't know that going in, it's almost kind of, like, the plot might almost be confusing. But once you easily get that figured out, the movie's just kind of a non-stop bullet once it goes. And that's not just the whole fact that basically the whole movie's a car chase also, but the dialogue helps a lot too. But before that, there's also the whole idea of how much of this journey we, like, sort of skip. Is kind of something that really sort of puts you in the sort of speedy look at it from the get-go, because he builds up that it's going to be 900 miles there and 900 miles back within this span of like 28 hours. But the interesting thing about this is the 900 miles down is almost like skipped over. Like, we see it in just little bits and pieces as they go there. Just see like a highlight reel of it that lasts like a minute. And then there's the nighttime scene when he, like, has to hide from the cop and all that, and does the fantastic fourth wall break smile into the camera. And then before we know it, they're just there. And they sort of makes you want, like, if you don't know what the whole setup is, your first thought might be, well, okay, then what the hell is the rest of the movie? Because they got there in like 2 minutes. But yeah, it's all about the ride back is the issue. And it's really funny thinking about the fact that usually, especially in movies like this, especially in the 70s, a woman being one of the major characters would almost be, like, shoehorned in and basically there just because, for, like, an eye candy thing or whatever, or shoehorning in a love story or something like that. But no, the insertion of Sally Field into this story is, like, the whole setting off point, because despite the whole bootlegging plot, that's not why they're being chased, believe it or not. Obviously, she rebuked Sheriff Justice's son at the altar, and now the whole posse is looking for them and chasing her, who just happens to be in his car. And then that's what the whole movie is from then on. And it's kind of amazing. So, I was talking about, before we go into the characters, actually the use of the dialogue here, about how snappy it is and how it's just as much of a factor in how fast-paced the movie feels as the fact that it's a car chase in itself. Where you have stuff like, obviously, Bandit's character is sort of... he's all about the puns, basically. But the interesting thing about that is that the movie never seems to, like, stop for a joke. Something Cannonball Run could certainly learn from. Because, and even in the dialogue, too, because, like, one of the first scenes, when he goes to get Cletus, and they're talking about how he's telling him about the job, and then Cletus says, like, well, I can't do that, I have to go, you know, pick up manure somewhere, and Bandit says, what a shitty job. And he says that pun, and he inserts it in there with, like, no sort of comedy pause or anything. It does not slow the dialogue down at all whatsoever. It just keeps on going without any interruption, despite the fact that they're throwing these little lines in there. And I think that helps it work a lot. And the thing also about how fast the dialogue moves is the fact that I believe Burt Reynolds himself has said multiple times that he didn't consider himself, like, the greatest actor or anything like that. And you probably could just put him in a certain area, like, discounting the fact that he, you know, had an Oscar nomination for Boogie Nights and all that stuff, but being known for movies like this and more of, like, the action and, like, comedy or somewhere in the middle there, it'd be easy to dismiss him as just sort of like a John Wayne type, where you don't really think of him much as an actor so much as just his personality in general, and how even though it sort of felt like he was playing the same character, that's what we came to see anyway. And that might seem like it makes him limited as an actor, but the interesting thing is that it really takes a certain kind of something to be able to deliver dialogue like this in that really natural way. And it's like, he may have been really sort of underrating himself in regards to how much this movie works by how the dialogue is delivered, and how much of that dialogue is his, and how that needs to hit those beats just right constantly throughout the movie. And that's what he's really perfected with this role in particular. So I think that's definitely part of the way his charm just really sort of burst out of this role and became one of his more iconic characters, is just the way he speaks and says his lines. It's just like a whole thing that sort of goes past people when they think about how much it would take as an actor to do this part anyway, and not just sort of drive the car down the street, which is really great. It does have, every now and then, dialogue does feel a little bit redundant, like, him telling Sally Field that he wants to jump her comes up twice in two different ways. There's the first one when he talks about, when he gives her the name Frog because she always bounces around and he wants to jump her. But then it comes up again when they jump the bridge, and she's like, oh, we need to jump something else, and he says something like, I want to jump you, or jump me, I guess. And it's like, that's... sometimes when it hits those notes, it's kind of like, okay, it doesn't quite have the punch. But for the most part, they get past that, and it's really good. It has a really nice flow to it. And talking about the other characters, obviously, most notable would be Jackie Gleason, as the Smokey, as it were. And the interesting thing about this is not only does he have, like, obviously he has a grand entrance with the score playing and the way he gets out of the car and the whole, his son basically, you know, lights his cigarettes for him and all that stuff. He has in this whole thing, but it also sort of plays up the sort of comedic aspect where even though he's got all this planned out and has this cool way about him, there's always something askew. The cigarettes turn the wrong way, or somebody misinterprets what he's saying, or whatever. And it's great, but he can still do, like, the really intimidating thing, like when he gets pulled over for how shitty his car is at this point, and goes off on the guy about profanity before ending with a fuck off as he drives off. There is, like, that really intimidating moment where we see him, like, tear this dude down, who was, like, the big authority figure 30 seconds ago, and now it's just, like, this meek mouse in comparison. So that stuff's really great, and just the little things in there sometimes, too, like when he eats the sandwich in the restaurant, and he's just, like, going off on this constant dialogue that he has, and then he just stops because he, like, gets indigestion for a second. and it's perfect for that character too. And sort of the unsung hero of this movie would have to be Jerry Reed as Cletus, because not only is Cletus just a great character in general, and he brings that to it, but the fact that we all know that Jerry Reed's music is constant throughout the movie, whether it be the score or the songs themselves. And there's definitely something to that, especially the use of Eastbound and Down, where it's like it's only Eastbound and Down towards the end when they're actually going east, but for most of the movie it's Westbound and Down, which is a really clever detail. In a way, like, his song basically tells the story as it's happening. It's like, that would almost seem redundant, but it's actually kind of too amazing to even be seen that way. Because it's like, yeah, just there's things going together at the same time, just makes this perfect sort of recipe for what we're looking at. So, and then there's also, you know, some of the stuff in the middle, like when he gets into the bar fight, and there's the stuff where he's like, after that's happened and we see him like really torn down, we just get this long kind of silent shot that kind of sticks out in the movie in an interesting way, of him just walking back to his truck in shame. But then just immediately going right back into the character we know once he realizes he can just run the bikes over on his way out. And then he's just right back into it. All the shame is gone at this point. And I really like the way he handled that scene. And just the fact that, you know, the way he's able to make this character so memorable and so likable, despite the fact that for like the entire first hour of the movie, we rarely see him outside the cab of his truck, just in that small space with just his dog and the radio, and he's able to create this character that's so memorable. Is great. I'm also a fan of him, you know, throwing the notebook and saying, "I gotta get the hell out of here," and stuff like that. Just pretty much anything he does in this is great, whether it be the music or the character. And then, like I said, obviously Satterfield is like the driving point of the plot, interestingly enough, but also there's something about when she gets into the car immediately, and the way it goes from there, and we pretty much have to accept this sort of instant connection between them. And I'm sure it helps a lot that, obviously, Burt Reynolds said a lot, they obviously dated for like 5 years or something after this. And then in his later years, Burt Reynolds would bring up that he considered Sally Field like the love of his life. Much to her dismay, saying that so publicly a lot, but even so, it was there, and it's really interesting to really see that in their sort of chemistry on the screen also, and it sort of immediately makes you buy that, because in any other movie you would probably think that it's a bit forced and it's quite sudden and it wouldn't be believable, but it's like totally believable from the start and then all the way through. And it's just, I suppose it's sort of that opposites attract thing, where they actually have the scene where they're sort of just stop and walk, and they basically come to the conclusion that they have absolutely nothing in common whatsoever. But he actually finds a way to make them more closer, interestingly enough. So, I do really like that aspect of it, and then just the characters that sort of just come in and out, and the way that the Bandit has like just everybody is like an ally just anywhere, even the dudes in the hearse, even they have a CV and they're like an ally that can distract the cops for however long they need to, which is great. Like I said, maybe there's some stuff that wouldn't stand up now, like what's Jackie Gleason's line about poontanging around with those showfolk fags, something like that. Like every now and then there is something like that that sort of does give the movie a dated look. But like I said, weirdly enough, nothing makes it seem more dated than just the plot itself, which is so irrelevant because it's really not even the plot once it gets going. It's like the starting point. So that's fine. I just wanted to bring that up. And obviously, it's been so like inspirational for other projects down the road. There was like, obviously they had the 2 sequels, and then they had like those TV movies that were like trying to do the same thing that just failed. I think Hal Needham did those also. And obviously when you look at stuff like the stuff that would come out later, like I guess you could say Cannonball Run, even though it's the same, it's him and Needham still, and then stuff like Speed Zone later, but even so, it does feel like the start of something. And we did have, it's my understanding, a movie called Moonrunners was kind of like the starting basis for the Dukes of Hazzard, despite the fact that the Dukes of Hazzard didn't start on TV until 2 years after this came out. It's my understanding that despite Moonrunners' existence, it was the popularity of Smokey and the Bandit that was able to get sort of the Dukes of Hazzard like greenlit and then on TV and for however many years it was. And it did end up being the second highest grossing movie of 1977. Guess what number one was? So, but despite that, still, it's one of those cases where this would probably be a different movie if it wasn't so well made. And I know that seems like an obvious thing to say, but I mean, with the way, like the editing, for instance, this movie, by the way, was nominated for an Oscar for its editing, and it's totally easy to see why, with the way you have all these, not just the chases themselves, but the way we cut back and forth between all the different characters, big or small, and they just keep that flow, like, really constant, but also it's all just, you know, shot really well, where it doesn't feel fake. This was before everything felt, like, extremely fake whenever they would do this, and this is one of those movies that very much, you can see them doing everything, like obviously how Needham was a stuntman, and I think Burt Reynolds was in that territory also, so it all feels, like, really real, and it's movies like this that really show you just how, I mean, it's something that's brought up a lot with how, you know, not so, a little too choreographed or not so choreographed fight or chase scenes or action scenes feel now. But it sometimes does get lost in just how much of a huge difference it makes when these scenes like this feel real, especially if they're going to be the whole movie and created by people that specialize in this field. It does come through in a big way. And I think just really a major factor in how good it is also, and how the lasting impact that it's had, is just how light-natured it is, especially with, you know, like, obviously there's going to be crash scenes and stuff like that, but there's something really funny about that. Like, there's no, I would say no stakes, but that's kind of like the whole point of it. Like, when a cop crashes, it's not supposed to be some big stakes thing. It's supposed to be funny, which it is. These dumbass cops just crashing in all these different funny ways. Really brings out this nature of the movie that's just really appealing. And then, of course, obviously, cultural impact-wise, it's just endless. Obviously, the Black Trans Am is, like, iconic now. There's the thing that they do, that was, like, commemorating, like, the anniversaries of the movie, where it was, I think it's called the Bandit Run, where it's, like, they get together this sort of, like, road trip, and it's, like, the exact route from Texarkana to Georgia that they took in the actual movie. It's stuff like that is just constantly going on, and it's just still constantly is in people's minds and doing these great big things and making people do these really elaborate things just for the sake of celebrating the movie, which really says something. So, in between the characters and the dialogue and the way everything's put together, it's easy to see why that would happen. So, and it's like endlessly rewatchable. Everybody can quote it. It's all in there in this nice package. So that sort of takes us to Cannonball Run. As I mentioned, not really the biggest fan of, but it is Hal Needham again. It is, to my understanding, not to throw it under the bus immediately, but it is worth mentioning. It's my understanding that Burt Reynolds did actually say that he didn't really feel that he should have done Cannonball Run. He didn't really want to do Cannonball Run, but there was the money factor, and there was also that it was basically a favor to Hal Needham while he was in the movie, despite the fact that it's not very good. So, but I do know it has its fans, and I will get to that. But in the meantime, we have this setup that we've known many times before, that so many movies have done since, and we're doing before. It does feel like it's like a spoof of Cannonball and other movies like that, but still, this whole idea of, and the Gumball Rally, of course, probably the best one in this sort of, you know, I guess genre, if you want to call that in itself, the whole racing, like, cross-country thing. And obviously these cannonballers now have a reputation, and they're referred to as, first somebody says terrorists, but then somebody says they make terrorists look like the Sisters of Charity. So, but that also seems a little bit blown out of proportion when you actually watch the movie. But of course, the appeal of that is that this is based on, like, an actual thing that Hal Needham and the writer of the movie actually took part in. I think the writer had, like, you know, was part of its whole creation. And it was they did it, like, 5 times throughout the 70s, I think. And then, like, this one's mainly based on the one that was in 79, I think. So, it's interesting when you look at it from that perspective, but then you see the movie that we got, despite all the possibilities that could have gone into this. Since this movie is so obsessed with referencing Roger Moore as James Bond, I'd like to do that myself to talk about how I see Cannonball Run. If you haven't seen The Man with the Golden Gun, you've probably at least heard about the really famous scene where they do the big stunt with the car, where it ramps and then it does the spin in the air and then manages to land back on its wheels and drive off before it hits the other side. And it was this perfect stunt that they only did that one time, because they said it was so hard to pull off that if they couldn't pull it off the first time, they were just going to cut it entirely from the movie. And they pulled off this magnificent stunt. It's like one of those famous stunts in movie history. And then they did something really fucking stupid in post-production by adding a slide whistle sound to this stunt on screen. Like, the director regretted it, the viewers regret it, everybody regrets it. It was a dumb decision that just made something awesome, that was a huge accomplishment, into something really stupid and really silly that everybody wishes was different. That slide whistle in The Man with the Golden Gun during that awesome stunt is basically Cannonball Run in a nutshell. Where you have all this you have this stunt work, some of this really nice stuff of like cars flying through the air, all the stuff is real, it's all these real stunt people doing all this real shit, and then you've got this dumbass fucking comedy interrupting it constantly. So, one of the things it really bases its humor on is references. Like, we talk about, you know, in movies today, how people are so tired of comedies basically just making references and passing that off as their jokes, when it's so lazy and they don't add anything, they just make the references. A lot of that is this. Stuff like, you're supposed to just really love the fact when they're trying to figure out, Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise are trying to figure out which vehicle they're going to use in the Cannonball, and one of the options that Reynolds comes up with, what about a black Trans Am? And then he immediately cuts himself off and says, oh no, wait, that's been done. That's pretty much the peak of the jokes in this movie. There's the whole thing with, like, there's Jackie Chan and the other guy who are called by their real names in the movie, but in the credits are just Subaru Driver number 1 and Subaru Driver number 2. And then you've got the whole Roger Moore thing, where he's playing a dude, he's like an heir to some company or something, but he decides to become Roger Moore. And be called Roger Moore. He drives the Aston Martin. They play this little knockoff Bond theme every time we see him. His mom even says, like, you know, that idiot spy business. And so this is the joke every time Roger Moore's on screen. And Roger Moore gets a pretty decent amount of screen time. And then every single time it cuts back to him, your thought is like, okay, are they going to do something new now? Or what are we going to... No, it's another Bond reference. Then they cut to something else. And then they cut back to Roger Moore, and you're like, oh, it's a Roger Moore scene. Okay, what are they going to do with this now? Let's see where this scene goes. And it's like, no, stupid me, it's another Bond reference. And that's Roger Moore's whole screen time every time we cut back to him. And like I said, we cut back to him a lot. The only way they change the joke is actually kind of funny, and I don't know if it's funny on its own, or if it's because they just finally decided to change the joke. And that's when, at the very end, he picks up the girl, and the girl's like, you know, fanning out, saying, you know, like, she loves this movie, she's seen them all, and then it turns out she thinks he's George Hamilton. And it's like, that's probably the funniest joke in the movie. I don't know if it's because it had that build-up of, oh, we were just expecting another fucking Bond joke. But either way, so, yeah, there's that. And then we've got, Peter Fonda shows up for like 20 seconds. Take a wild guess what he's doing. Yes, of course he's in a biker gang. Whether you want that to be the Wild Angels or Easy Rider, doesn't matter. Henry Fonda on a bike equals joke, apparently. So, that's what that is. And the thing about it, though, is that you look at... I understand it. When you watch a movie like Cannonball Run, it's like, it doesn't really matter what the plot is, because there hardly even is one. It's all about the characters and whatever it is they're doing and all that. But the trouble is that, even so, there's still supposed to be a race happening here, at least. Okay? But the problem here is that we have... It doesn't feel like anybody's racing. It feels like we meet a whole bunch of different characters that we, like, you know, unevenly cut back and forth between. I guess, obviously, Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise and Farrah Fawcett here are supposed to kind of be, like, our main group, like, the heroes of the story, I guess. And we cut back to them more often than the other people, but even so, there's like a huge unevenness here. Even before it starts, when we're like, we keep cutting back to them after every person, and it's like, it's so unfocused, because it's like, they start off in like, you know, the car, and then in like the next time we cut to them, they're in a plane, and then the next time we cut to them, they're in a boat, and then the boat crashes, and there is no direction here whatsoever. It's all basically getting to them being in the ambulance and then figuring that out. But, I don't know, because, like, when you look at, like, when they're in the plane, and he's like, oh, we're out of beer, and he lands the plane in the middle of the street while Don always runs in, and then they fly back off. It's like its own individual thing. Like, it's like a Robot Chicken sketch. Which, of course, I say when Burt Reynolds and Don always actually reprise these characters for a Robot Chicken sketch once, but regardless, that's what the whole movie feels like. And while in another movie, like the Kentucky Fried Movie or Amazon Went on the Moon or something, that makes sense. But there's actually something supposed to be happening in this movie, which is the race. Which isn't really that hard to keep up with. But it just feels like we're getting these individual sketches that are totally and completely unrelated to everything, that has nothing to do with these people moving forward. It's just they stop, and they do, and I struggle to even say there's like, it would be one thing if there was like a joke or a punchline in each of these little scenes in between, whenever it cut to, you know, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., or Jackie Chan, or whatever, or Terry Bradshaw, or whatever. But the thing is it's like the characters just kind of are there to ramble, and the joke is basically that it's them. That it's Terry Bradshaw, that it's Jackie Chan, that it's Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. That's about it. There's no setups to jokes. There's no punchlines. How can there be punchlines if there are no setups? It's just them just sort of rambling. Like I said, even before the movie starts, especially with Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise, it's like the dialogue is so rambly that every line of dialogue does not feel connected to the line of dialogue that came before it. Forget trying to make the scenes seem like they're in the same movie. They can't even make the lines feel like they're in the same scenes. And it's just a fucking mess. And I do think that, and yes, I know you could probably say, like maybe the lack of focus or maybe the lack of sense is the point. Maybe that's why it's funny. But the thing is like, it would be better if the individual scenes had any, I don't know. There's maybe one or two funny lines in this. I can't say funny scenes, because even if there's a funny line in a scene, they always find a way to fuck it up. It's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. So, but I know you probably keep saying, like, well, you know, what does dialogue matter? What does, you know, all that matter? It's just, but that's the thing, is, yeah, if this were the movie it set itself up as, where it was going to have, like, really wild-ass stunts and stuff like that, and, like, take, for instance, the bike jumping out of the plane. This is where the Man with the Golden Gun thing comes in, where it's like, this should be something totally awesome, but they have him singing this song to himself. They're trying to make something funny out of it, that might be funny to maybe a 2-year-old, and they're always undermining the decent stuff that they can do, by basically trying to even make this a comedy. So it's like, and I even struggle to call it like its own movie, because all they have are references and cameos and famous faces, but none of it comes together in any way whatsoever. It's like they actually feel like they're racing in like the last 5 minutes, when they're literally racing. Every other time it feels like a completely separate sketch with like no urgency, no jokes, no nothing. It's just people sort of talking, but it doesn't matter what they're saying, because the fact that they're on the screen at all is basically the only point they're trying to make. And it's like, I cannot... This movie has a lot of fans, and I get it. But I just do not understand at all where the entertainment value in this could possibly be. And I don't want to get on those people's cases either, because you could say, like, a lot of people probably grew up with this movie in the same vein that they did Smokey and the Bandit. They just watched them probably close together multiple times throughout childhood, as a teenager, and then into adulthood. And Smokey and the Bandit will never get old. The thing about Cannonball Run, though, is that you do it the same way, and you could probably say, there'll be some asshole that says people only like it because of nostalgia, which is the most overused, regurgitated phrase I can think of that has absolutely no place in any sort of... Because saying something is like... Because it's about the way things age. Because somebody could watch something that they used to watch in their childhood, and maybe it holds up for them. Maybe they still think it's entertaining. Maybe they still like it for whatever they liked it for before in their childhood or whatever. But that same person could probably watch something else from their childhood and say, oh, this does not hold up at all, it fucking sucks now. So to basically say that people like something because of nostalgia is to basically think that you can just assume why people like something, which is arrogant and makes you sound like just an irritating piece of shit. So I'm not going to say that that's the reason people like Cannonball Run. I'm just going to tell you that I don't get it. I cannot possibly see what people see in this, apparently, but because it's just devoid of any type of entertainment whatsoever to me. And even the stunt work feels like it's so few and far between because they're so bent on just having celebrities just talk directionlessly. So it's like every now and then, like, you know, Jackie Chan's car will fly, or like I said, the bike will come out of the plane. A car might ramp something, and that's about it. In a movie that's like 95 minutes, there's maybe like 3 things that can call out that's like, this is the reason they made this movie. And I don't get it. So, and then they drag on the jokes like the Doctor. The Doctor joke just goes on and on and on and on forever. And the whole Van Helsing thing doesn't even make fucking sense in context as a reference. Even the references don't make sense to what they're referencing. You've got Farrah Fawcett here, who is like, if you're expecting the chemistry between Burt Reynolds and Farrah Fawcett that we have with Burt Reynolds and Sally Field, you are going to be sorely mistaken. Absolutely. They can't recreate that at all. But then there's also the character of Dom DeLuise in general. Here, I think the problem here is, well, the good thing to say about it is that obviously he and Burt Reynolds made this really great team because they obviously worked together many times. But then you also look at it in the idea that Dom DeLuise was always this really over-the-top sort of, you know, Buddy Hackett type, and Burt Reynolds was like going to be the really straight one, despite the fact that Reynolds can be hilarious by himself, and with that contagious laugh and everything. But the thing here is that I can absolutely appreciate their teaming, from, like, you know, structurally, comedy-wise, how the two of them, you know, combat off each other. But as a standalone, Dom DeLuise just never worked for me, like, in hardly any movie. Like, his style of humor and my sense of humor just didn't line up, just really didn't at all. So that's always gonna be an issue, regardless. But like I said, I can appreciate just the teaming of him and Burt Reynolds and how well the fact that the way their styles would clash, and the way Reynolds could play the straight man off them while also being funny himself, absolutely made for a great duo. But that's pretty much all I can say about that. So yeah, this remains a mystery to me, this movie's popularity. I'm right with Reynolds saying that this was, like, you know, probably a low point in his career. You can see him doing it for a friend. Now, mind you, not sure how something else happened down the road, but speaking of that, it is, so, it's like, you look at this, and I do say that if you want something like Cannonball Run that's actually, like, good, I would strongly recommend the Gumball Rally, which I do own, but the only trouble is that it's in a 2-pack. And it's like, well, we have the Gumball Rally. What could be in here with it? Because we've done this whole, you know, cross-country race comedy thing quite a bit, like the Great Race and stuff like that. So it's like, what can we possibly put with the Gumball Rally that would make it look even better than it already is? Like, what's a movie that is so completely bottom of the barrel that we can put with it that's, you know, worse than Cannonball Run, worse than any of the other stuff that's the stuff that's basically trying to imitate this and failing miserably? What could it possibly be? How about Cannonball Run 2? So that's unfortunate, but as you can see, I don't have the first Cannonball Run. It managed to escape me. I would certainly not own Cannonball Run 2 if not for the fact that I had to get it. Because I wanted Gumball Rally, I had to settle with having it too. So yeah, so what I'm really trying to say here is that Smokey and the Bandit is awesome and will always stand the test of time. So that's pretty much all I need to say about this. There's probably a couple of other Burt Reynolds related ones that I would want to do down the road. So this might not be it for this, at least, you know, down the road. So we'll see what else comes up. So in the meantime, we've got this same old shit coming, all the verses and stuff. We're coming up on the October one where we're gonna have all the horror ones. And the reviews are pretty much coming as you would expect. So until all that stuff, I think that's it.